The Korean War wasn't just another regional conflict. It was democracy's first military test of collective security against communist expansion. In June 1950, as NATO's ink barely dried, Kim Il-sung's invasion of South Korea posed the ultimate question. Would democratic nations fight together to stop Soviet-backed aggression, or would they retreat and let communism spread unchecked across Asia? This moment revealed whether democratic alliances could move beyond treaties to battlefield sacrifice. While Stalin orchestrated the invasion through his North Korean puppet, 16 democratic nations chose to shed blood defending freedom they had never directly threatened. The Korean conflict didn't just pit North against South. It tested whether voluntary democratic cooperation could defeat coordinated communist expansion. Harry Truman, facing America's first war under United Nations command, understood what authoritarian regimes could never grasp. Free nations fighting for shared principles possess moral strength that puppet armies cannot match. Korea became proof that when democracies unite against tyranny with military force, they can stop communist conquest, but only at tremendous cost to the very freedoms they defend.
On June 25, 1950, 75,000 North Korean troops stormed across the 38th parallel, overwhelming South Korean defenders within hours. This wasn't spontaneous aggression. It was Stalin's calculated test of Western resolve. The Soviet leader had armed Kim Il-sung's forces with tanks, artillery, and aircraft, while democratic nations focused on European recovery. Stalin's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Force democratic nations to choose between costly military intervention or humiliating retreat. If democracies abandoned South Korea, it would prove that collective security was meaningless rhetoric. If they fought, they would drain resources from European reconstruction, while risking nuclear escalation. President Truman faced an impossible choice that revealed democracy's greatest weakness. Elected leaders must justify war to voters who bear its costs. Authoritarian regimes start wars by decree. Democratic governments require congressional approval, public support, and international legitimacy. But democracy's deliberative process, while slower than authoritarian command, created something more durable: genuine commitment based on shared values rather than imposed obligations. The United Nations Security Council's condemnation of North Korean aggression legitimized military intervention in ways that no authoritarian alliance could match.
The Korean War showcased the fundamental difference between democratic cooperation and authoritarian coordination. While North Korea fought as Stalin's proxy with Chinese communist backing, UN forces represented genuine international commitment to collective security. Consider the contrast. North Korean soldiers fought because they were ordered to by a dictator who executed deserters. Chinese volunteers crossed the Yalu River because Mao commanded them, not because they chose to defend Korean communism. Their motivation came from fear of punishment, not belief in their cause. UN forces, conversely, came from democratic societies, where military service required either voluntary enlistment or democratically approved conscription. American soldiers fought alongside British, Canadian, Turkish, Filipino, and other democratic troops, each representing nations that had chosen intervention through parliamentary debate and public discourse. This democratic foundation created unexpected military advantages.
When General Douglas MacArthur's insubordination threatened civilian control, President Truman fired him, demonstrating that even popular generals answered to elected leaders in democratic systems. Democratic military leadership proved superior to communist command and control. While Chinese and North Korean forces relied on mass attacks and political commissars, UN troops used innovative tactics, superior technology, and flexible decision-making that reflected their society's values. Korea demonstrated that democratic economies could sustain military production while maintaining civilian prosperity, something communist systems could never achieve. While North Korea and China mobilized through forced labor and resource extraction, democratic nations increased defense spending through market mechanisms and voluntary sacrifice. American factories converted automobile production to tank manufacturing without Soviet-style coercion. Workers accepted overtime and rationing because they understood the stakes, not because secret police threatened them. British, Canadian, and other Allied economies contributed weapons and supplies through voluntary cooperation. This economic flexibility gave democratic forces decisive advantages. While communist troops relied on limited Soviet weapons and Chinese masses, UN forces deployed cutting-edge technology, superior medical care, and reliable supply lines that communist command economies couldn't match. Korea revealed democracy's greatest challenge in fighting authoritarian aggression. Free societies must justify casualties to citizens who bear the ultimate cost. While Stalin and Mao could sacrifice unlimited troops without political consequences, democratic leaders faced voters, grieving families, and public opposition. American casualties: 36,574 killed, 103,284 wounded, represented real families in democratic communities, not statistics in authoritarian reports. Each loss generated political pressure, congressional hearings, and public debate that authoritarian regimes never experience. The war's stalemate reflected democracy's unwillingness to pursue total victory at any cost. This restraint frustrated military commanders, but reflected democratic values that prioritize human life over territorial conquest. Today's challenges from Putin's Russia, Xi's China, and Kim Jong-un's North Korea follow the Korean War playbook. Test democratic resolve through proxy conflicts, exploit democratic debate as weakness, and bet that free societies lack the stomach for sustained resistance. When Putin invaded Ukraine, democratic nations again chose voluntary cooperation over appeasement, providing weapons, economic sanctions, and moral support through consultative processes that authoritarian regimes cannot replicate. The Korean precedent remains relevant. Authoritarian regimes consistently underestimate democratic resolve because they mistake deliberation for weakness. While democracies debate the costs of resistance, they ultimately fight with moral conviction that mercenary armies cannot match. The Korean War proved that democratic nations could fight effectively against communist expansion, but only by maintaining the values that made their societies worth defending. The conflict established a template for Cold War confrontation. Limited war for unlimited principles, fought by free societies against authoritarian aggression. Stalin's great miscalculation was believing that democratic nations would choose comfort over commitment when faced with distant threats. Korea demonstrated the opposite. When democratic principles are at stake, free peoples will sacrifice blood and treasure to defend liberty. As we face modern authoritarian threats, Korea's lesson remains vital. Democratic nations, united in defense of shared values, can stop tyranny's advance, but only through sustained commitment that reflects our deepest convictions about human freedom and dignity.